Hi, and welcome to Rule of Carnage. This is a podcast, a video series, a set of conversations between myself, Glenn Ford, a games designer and developer, and this guy, Mike Hutchinson, also games designer and developer,
Hello.
wherein wherein we may, we must, we will, and we should talk about designing better miniatures games. And
That was
um,
good. I like that intro. Very good.
I was kind of happy. That
But
was going to be
can
my
we?
segue, but you totally sort of jumped on it there. I say that I phrase that in that particularly peculiar and unusual way because what we'd like to talk about today, what I'd like to talk about today, is some of those funny little words, the tiny words that trip up rules and rules writers and rules readers quite regularly, specifically to naughty little words, may and must, and we'll talk about those a bit. And then there are a handful of other ones that I think
I mean,
um
honestly, it took me a fair while to get cannot right.
yes, yeah, and it's funny how tricky some of these. And before we get too much into the conversation, I'll just make a big shout out here to Tabletop War Games, a designer's and writer's handbook, which has a really nice section on some of these words and some of the pitfalls and traps with them. Well, I'll start with May. So May has like two primary forms, which is permissive and circumstantial.
Mm.
So permissive might be something like if a soldier has two ranged weapons, they may fire with either of them on their shooting turn, depending on which their player chooses. And circumstantial would be a unit may find itself in a forest at the start of its turn. That's not saying that you have the choice to have your unit find itself in a forest at the start of its turn. It's just saying sometimes at the start of its turn it'll be in a forest. And by and large, they're fine to sort of have side by side, apart from in rules specifically, where you get a phrase like a unit may enter a forest. And there it's like, okay, do you mean they're allowed to enter a forest,
Yeah.
or do you mean when a unit enters the forest, here is a set of sequences to go through and things that should take place. Now, by and large, rules have decided. I think we've come together like fairly collectively in modern rules writing to decide that may is sharply and strictly the permissive form of it. And it's super interesting reading like, Featherstone era sort of rule books because they absolutely haven't decided that. And may is used circumstantially all the time. And it's really odd to sort of read it, and it's very sort of casual and has a certain sort of voice. Now, specifically today, myself and Mike were having a little conversation as we sometimes do, back and forth over a rule set, over the nature not of may, but of may not. A unit may not do a certain thing, and such like. I am of the opinion that may not is a corollary to may. That essentially, whenever you say may, you're saying may or may not, but you're saving yourself some time and you're chopping out or may not. And that essentially, every time you say may, you could say may not, because it's exactly the same equivalency. The two things are literally identical in the way that we mean them, because we mean them permissively and not circumstantially. Mike, you have a different.
Yeah, no, I completely disagree. So I
Yeah.
believe that colloquially, and specifically when we're talking about rules writing, so we're in a instructional sort of boundary setting communication paradigm. When we say may not, we mean it. It's clear that it's the permissive. Like the circumstantial may is quite archaic and not used in conversation very much anymore. Like it's really quite a strange thing to go about saying in daily conversation. And given that you're in a rules presentation mode, like it's very clear that the purpose of these rules is to tell you what you can and can't do within the confines of the game. I think that within the magic circle of explaining a game, I think that may not is very clearly a instruction not to be able to do something. But I do completely understand that isn't an ironclad case. It just feels, as I have been feeling my way through a lot of this more technical rules writing, when I encounter myself writing a may not, and when I read one back, it to me always feels anti-permissive in meaning.
So yeah, so I think you sometimes take may not and must not to be sort of essentially interchangeable.
Yeah, no, and actually, after we had a chat, I bothered my ex academic wife for like 30 minutes trying to get her to come up with a good explanation of why must not and may not were in any way different in the scenario of communicating rules.
So the example that I would have for why they are different
Hmm.
is I might say something like, um, you have a choice to fire a weapon or take another action with your second action point of the turn.
Yeah.
You may fire your weapon. If you do, then do this. You may not fire your weapon. If you do, then do this. In that
And
instance,
I just think that's a very oddly passive way to communicate. I would restructure that sentence so that it was much more like um what's the word, procedural. I mean,
sure,
it's like in that situation I would definitely write if you do and then if you do not, because it's
sure.
not a question of like if you may do it. It's like, no, have you done it? If you have done it, then this rule clause needs to trigger.
Yeah, and if you have not done it, but then if you're not using may at all and you're using if, and I think one of the things about may is that may and may not are both largely sort of unnecessary.
Well,
By
but the thing is that may specifically, ignoring may specifically has been given a optionality jargon in our rules writing where I see a must and I see a may, and I understand that there is an intentional difference between those two phrases that's very crisp. And maybe it comes from, I don't know where it comes from. Like maybe I read it in the Magic the Gathering rules,
mm,
20 years ago, when it said like a must is always harder than a may.
yeah, no, absolutely, and I've been at many tables where there's a rules discussion and somebody says, "Okay, does it say may?" And that's sort of all the discussion
Yeah,
comes
that
down to. It says may,
closes the
close
issue.
it down. And that's the thing. May and must are very useful. May not, specifically, if you believe that may not in every way, shape, and form in every single instance means must not, why would you ever use may not? Why would you just not use must not? Given that I think that may not can sometimes mean, well, you may or you may not.
Right, and I have a very specific answer for that. It's a stylistic answer, and it's that, in my opinion, get, taking the assumption that may not and must not are basically semantically identical, I feel like the only real difference is one of tone and familiarity and status. And so a must not is a harder, more demanding, more didactic expression of that same idea. It's a bit more stern and it's higher status, whereas a may not is exactly the same meaning, but it is more like equal stature. It's more gentle. It's just purely a tone piece.
And one of the, I think, possibly connected to this is more and more, I feel like must and must not are very weak words and very overused in rules writing. And frankly, whenever I see a must, it feels like a rules writer that doesn't quite have confidence in what he's saying. And the reason I say that is if I say, okay, if you want to fire your weapon, roll some dice, four or more's hit, the enemy takes a wound for each roll of four or higher. I don't say you must roll dice and the enemy must take wounds for a four or more, because I'm totally confident that you'll just roll the dice because I told you to. These are rules. I tell you what to do, and then you do it because I have told you what to do, because that's the nature of rules. And so
Right.
the moments where you sort of stop and say, you must do such and such a thing, rather than just saying, do it. I've told you to do it. For me, must, I think is very overused. I really try to only use it if it's part of an if then clause, where it's like, if you do X, then part of doing X comes with a secondary part to the section wherein you must now also do blah blah.
Yeah, I use must as an unavoidable consequence connector
Yeah,
quite
and I
often.
and I really see, I think way too many rule sets using must when you could just take the must out. The sentence would make exactly as much sense. And for me, it's a very weakening term because whenever I read must, I feel like, well, what happens if I don't then? If it's because it's all because must is always a must. You must do this or blah 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 in life. It's like, oh, you must go to bed at 9 o'clock.
I see. So
So,
there's a yeah. So there's a potential stylistic formulation which is only use a must when you provide a consequence for not.
yeah, I feel that way very much because it's one of the things where the things that are actual inevitabilities in life, death and taxes and gravity, you don't, it's not a sort of you must do it. It's just, well, this is what's happening, get on with it. Must is always like, okay, so what if I don't do it? What will be the consequences of doing it? There is an option not to, presumably. Um,
Yeah. So the other thing that I've been experimenting with recently as a way of saying you're not allowed to do this specific thing is experimenting with the phrase "it is not permitted for" or "it's not permitted to." So, for example, like if you've got hidden information underneath tokens, um, you can kind of intuit that the hidden information is not supposed to be looked at. Like you were told to put them face down, but if you didn't provide a rule that said "and don't look at them," like maybe people won't know that you definitely meant that, or somebody will try and interpret it. So it is not permitted to look at the underside of a face down token is maybe a formulation that's more crisply instructive.
I still think and don't look at them is the
Hmm.
strongest, crispest, finest form. And again, as soon as you say it is not permitted, I get very like,
So you're saying you're saying don't maybe,
yeah, yeah. I think
because don't is sort of almost like an ethical instruction. It's
it's
like
not should. It's not should and shouldn't. It's do and do not. Do and do not are physical
pure
instructions.
instructions.
Should and should not are ethical things. It's naughty not to do it. But because when I say do roll the dice to do a certain thing, that's not, nobody thinks that's some sort of ethical suggestion. It's like
But
I
like
was able to.
roll the dice is fine because it has an active verb, and I can just formulate that as the player rolls the dice and looks for fours, and fours are successful. If I want to say don't do something, or something is not allowed, that is just always more of an awkward construction of a rule.
I don't know. I think just do not look is there's
Mm.
a verb. There's a verb that you're not allowed to do, and there's a thing that you're not allowed to do that verb to. I don't
So
find.
so let's take an example from the 1 inch rule from Warhammer and all the subsequent games. So it is not permitted to move a model within 1 inches of an enemy model unless it's a charge. Do
Mm,
not move a model within 1 inch of another model unless it's part of a charge.
yeah, I don't
It's
see what doesn't make
functionally
sense.
identical.
I don't think, and again, it's like I say, I don't think it is not permitted, and you must not adds much to that sentence.
Right.
Say,
Whereas I would find you may not move a model within 1 inch is colloquially identical to all three of those.
yeah, and again, I would find that as you may not.
But you
It
may.
might happen that you don't. It might be such a case that you may not happen to move within a certain distance. You may choose to not. You don't have to move within a 1 inch. In fact, I'm banning you from it. Weirdly, I'm just phrasing it in such a way that you'll think that what I mean is that you have a choice, but actually the exact opposite. Um,
So there are a couple of things that sort of conflict with themselves here in the reality of writing a rule book. One is you want to use as plain English as possible, partly because you want the comprehension of your rules to be as likely as possible. And the other is that you want it to stylistically flow nicely. You want it to be good writing. And the problem that you get is that if you mess it up in any way and you have the grace that someone plays your game, because of the internet, they will come and expel their confusion onto the internet, and then it will confuse many other travelers on the internet for possibly decades to come when they encounter this confusion and go, wait, I wasn't confused about that, but now I am because someone on the internet is confused about it.
Absolutely, and this is part of the reason that I have an issue. I mean, this is really the reason I have an issue with may not as a a, a lighter, a nicer version of must not, because
Yeah,
it's like you're saying,
just a politer form.
yeah, you're saying it's like it's exactly the same level of like you are 100% not allowed to do it. There is no leeway here.
You may
It's
not
just
do it.
me saying please and thank you within the phrasing. You know,
There's not enough pleases and thank yous in wargaming rules.
I have a real issue of where it's like must and must not mean these exactly opposite and perfectly opposing things. May means one sort of thing, and may not means this other completely different thing. And the may not is just using a slightly politer voice, in your opinion. Because the thing about may, I tell you the thing about may not, when you say it's a politer phrase, the only time I hear people in life using the phrase may not is when a small child says, "Can I do that?" And they say, "You can, but you may not." I never hear may not in any other situation. It is not something that makes me feel, oh, what a polite person speaking in such a nice way. It's something that makes me feel like, oh, you're a grammar Nazi right there. That's what you are. You're amazing, you're amazing not. Yeah, so
Well,
you know,
you've got to teach them it early, Glenn, or you end up with conversations like this in middle age.
well, no, I mean, if you teach them early, they'll know that may not and must not are not grammatically identical, and yeah, you won't have this conversation.
I know, but there's a lot of things that don't make any grammatical sense which are in common parlance.
Yes, and well, I mean, but this is a thing,
I could care less, for example.
I couldn't care less.
Well, no, the Americans say I could care less, and it doesn't make
I'm
any
aware of
sense.
how many phrases the Americans have ruined so many phrases. I'll hold down the castle. Unless it's a bouncy castle full of helium, not a necessity, by the way. So, but I think that one of the points here is that may, whatever its usage in common parlance and in the normal world, has an absolute sort of agreed by the community usage in all tabletop games rules. It's not just war games rules. Board games are fully accepted, and everyone has agreed what may means and what its usage is and how it turns out. And everyone's by and large, I think, agreed about must. I think it's overused, and I think partly it's overused because it has such a sort of clear, accepted thing of I really, really meant it actually. And I think part of it is whatever may or may not be used as in common parlance. I think within game rules and game structuring, having two terms of different words that connect to different opposite words with different opposite purposes that you intend to have exactly identical meaning and purpose within a rule set, I think is a questionable choice and not one that I'm a fan of.
You know what? There's also something I am coming around to your point of view for the sake of clarity and connecting to the sort of default interpretation. I think the other thing that this potentially is an indicator of is that over the last 2 years I've been trying and failing to make my default language pattern in my writing more active and less passive. And I think like subject may not take action is a passive form of do not do the thing,
Yeah,
which is a much more active construction. So it is, you may not look at another person's hand of cards is a more passive statement of do not look at another player's hand of cards, which is much more.
and it's interesting in a way because obviously I recently been working on and writing the rules for Puke Apocalypse, and the voice of Puke Apocalypse is quite rude. It's a punk game. When
Right.
it's colloquial, it's speaking intentionally rudely in quite a sort of playful but harsh kind of way. And that's quite freeing to just be like, yeah, no, it's totally, it's not impolite and out of character to just say like, don't do that. There's a thing, don't do that, do that. This is just how it is. Let's get on with it, and let's get to the mucking about. I'll just tell you.
Right, and because the tone of voice that you're writing in permits you to have that more direct
Yeah.
formulation.
And I think possibly if I was in the middle of writing a rule set that was a little bit more didactic and warm in its tone, I might sort of be messing around with those sorts of terms a little bit more. But at the moment, it just feels totally like, yeah, it's absolutely fine to just be clear and crisp when you're sort of laying down rules for people, and they'll thank you in the end. When they avoid confusion and problems. Yeah, and I mean, there are a bunch of other little. As I say, I think Must and May are probably the two biggest and most important. There's a whole bunch of little ones that I think by and large have come to agreements on intos and withins and towards and aways and things like that. But I think those ones it would be nice to crisp up a little. May not, must not, and use must less.
Maybe Rule of Carnage, or indeed Glenn Ford, should publish like a manifesto of like, here are the 25 accepted wargaming terms. Any deviation from this usage, and you'll be struck off the record of wargames.
A while ago, I wrote a series of blogs, which was a set of manifestos for wargaming, and I do have a dictionary of terms somewhere on the
Ah,
website.
nice.
But yeah, it would be nice to sort of sit down and go, look, this is what we shall all agree may means. This is what we shall all agree if then and must not and may not. Mean, and post it up somewhere and ask everyone to sign up to a charter.
Well, I'm going to go look at me may nots, me must nots, and me it is not permitted, and see if I can make them more active. And
Yes, if
yeah.
you if you would like me to write out a extremely sort of harsh and dogmatic laying out of exactly what all minor and joining words with
In the puke apocalypse voice, please.
in the voice of Puke Apocalypse, please drop down into the comment section and say, yes, darling, we would like that. It would make us happy. I'll probably do it because I'm that
Yeah,
sort of.
no, I thought you were asking me if you should do that, to which the answer is yes.
I was speaking to our splendid viewers and suggesting, they drop down in the comment section. There are, as I say, other words. There are into, there is within, there is away, there is towards, all of which go a bit wonky when you start playing around with them. We've not talked about them here because I think they're generally agreed and crisply defined. But if people are struggling with them, please drop down in the comment section and ask us to talk about them. I'm more than happy to lay down the law on those things as well. If there's another word, one that we haven't mentioned that you find it slips around peculiarly within your brain when you come across it in a set of war games rules, please hit us up with that as well. There's always more sort of minutiae of phraseology to get into. Whilst you're down there doing that, please do whack a like and a subscribe button. Swing by the Discord and engage us as you may with things that you must. But for now, from this episode of Rule of Carnage, I think it'll be a thank you and goodbye. So, tatty bye.
Ciao, ciao.